Wolves can soon be killed easier in the EU for the first time in 30 years. The European Parliament approved downlisting their status from strictly protected to protected earlier this month. Many lawmakers celebrated. Environmental activists, however, warned that a dangerous precedent has been set, and other animals could be next in the firing line. But why has so much political attention been spent on one animal in the first place? Let's dive into it. The story begins, like it often does in Brussels, with EU rules. In this case, the Habitats Directive, which was adopted way back in 1992. It's the cornerstone of EU biodiversity policy, and under it, wolves were listed as strictly protected. This meant hunting was not allowed, although there were some exceptions. Before the directive, wolf numbers in Europe had been decimated by hunters. This strict protection status has been a conservation success as the wolf population rebounded and now stands at over 20,000, according to the European Commission. The animal returned to several European countries where it had not been for over a century. But the search has not been without its challenges. A large carnivore being in areas where people are not used to their presence or how to deal with them can be difficult to manage. Farmers are especially worried about losing livestock. In France, for example, 12,526 animals were killed by wolves in 2022, according to government figures. Farmers do get compensated for their losses, but some say it's not enough. Conservationists believe the best way to prevent attacks is by using electric fences, guard dogs, and having people nearby to watch over the animals. But many farmers say those tools are costly, unreliable, and unsupported. Meanwhile, frustration was mounting. In Italy, 9 wolves were found poisoned in a national park. In Spain, 2 severed wolf heads were left on the steps of a town city hall. As tensions grew, politicians took notice, particularly those from the European People's Party who wanted to position themselves as defenders of farmers. There was also a personal element. In 2022, a wolf killed European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's pony, Dolly. A year later, the Commission released a proposal to change the wolf's protection status. At the end of last year, the Berne Convention altered the wolf's protection, which paved the way for the EU to change its rules too. Some experts, however, criticized the process leading up to this change.
If we had been asked to do a really kind of robust analysis, we would probably conclude that delisting would have been compatible with their continued conservation. But the way that this process has been done is they have been using data which previously they said argued for not downlisting, and suddenly they use the same data again to argue for undelisting. And the way that it was operationalized through the different sort of administration structures was not really quoting the science in a fair way. It was very much a political decision. The wolf is being downlisted and we're going to do it now. So that sort of the outcome may actually be defendable, but the process has been very ad hoc and purely driven by politics.
Left and Green MEPs have been largely against the move, while those on the right have been mostly in favor. The final nail in the coffin came this month when Parliament gave its last approval to downlisting the wolf's protection. Activists and experts now fear that a precedent has been set and other animals such as bears and lynx will be targeted.
I certainly think it will set a precedent. The question is if it sets a good one or a bad one. If they repeat this kind of process with a political driven process without finding a way to include a more objective assessment into the process, it'll be a very bad precedent. But if they learn from this experience and come up with operational criteria and guidelines, then it makes a certain sense that as the conservation status of species changes, that the Habitat Directive should actually respond to reflect that changing status. So if kind of conservation succeeds and populations increase, then it makes sense that they should maybe be downlisted. If their conservation status gets worse, maybe their protection status needs to be increased. So I think everyone would like to see a more dynamic use of the types of kind of protection offered species, depending on how their conservation status actually plays out.
The EU's decision to ease protections for wolves has reopened long-standing tensions between conservation goals and rural livelihoods. Whether this marks a one-off exception or the beginning of a wider policy change remains to be seen.
No, so many people have been concerned that this downlisting will lead to a worsening of the conservation status of the wolf. And there's no automatic reason for concern, because countries still have the same obligation to conserve wolves that they had before. But what does happen is that the member states will now have much greater individual flexibility in how they manage wolves. But with this kind of flexibility also comes much more responsibility. And they still have to maintain the exact same population goals and favourable conservation status that they had before wolves got downlisted. So there's no need for the conservation outcome to get worse. But what we're going to have to do is wait and see how the different member states take on this new kind of responsibility and how they operationalize this kind of flexibility.